Yo, what is going on, Time Planet? Is your boy King Next here, back with another video, and this video is going to be kind of special due to the fact that this is going to be what if Shigaraki was a Batman who laughs. And like contrary to like many people's beliefs, like I don't actually celebrate Halloween, so this wouldn't really be considered a Halloween what if, more like I don't know what to call it, a Spooktober what if, or like at this point, whatever you want to call it, basically like some sort of special to celebrate like the last of October. Technically a Halloween would have, but at the same time, like I don't really celebrate Halloween myself. And yeah, another thing is shout out to Neptune for helping me like with the beginning of this what if. So yeah, let's just get on with the video. I'll plug their channel in the description below. Y'all already know the details about what do you call it, what they're working on as well. Roll that intro.
Now, here's how we start the story off. Dr. Ujiko, he was known as quite a famous doctor. He was quite an intelligent man. He was rather smart. Not only smart, but he seemed to be a pretty generous man as well. Many people respected his work ethic, but not many people knew about what he did on the other side of the spectrum. Not everybody knew who the real Ujiko was. In fact, he was probably one of the sickest people you would ever meet, and not even in a good way either. He was the worst of scum. One day he would have actually been approached by somebody in order to find out whether or not he could create a certain toxin. This toxin being capable of turning even the most heroic of individuals into villains. Now, obviously, many people would start to wonder, why would somebody ever want this sort of toxin to be created? Well, this someone was All For One. All For One was interested. He wanted to see just what Dr. Ujiko was capable of, and he could probably sell that to a couple of people as well, and build even more connections within the underground. He was at the top of the food chain technically, but there was always going to be a profit if he met with some more people. Sure, he was the king of the underworld, but even a king had to always create more and more connections with all sorts of businesses. Now, Dr. Ujiko wouldn't have been interested in trying to create this sort of formula. He would attempt to create this formula, and well, he would test it on several people throughout several months, with several trials and errors coming along the way. Some would have ended up dying from fear of their worst nightmares. Others would have their muscles grow to the point where they would die from heart attacks. And some, well, they would die from laughter. They would suffocate because of the fact that they could not just stop laughing. It ended up causing them to stop breathing. They weren't able to breathe, and then their hearts just gave out on them right after. Honestly, it seemed that this new formula, this toxin, was just not going to work. But All For One still had hope for Dr. Ujiko. All For One, before Dr. Ujiko decided to just scrap it, brought in an interesting new hero. He was an up-and-coming hero by the name of Gang Orca. This was going to be Dr. Ujiko's last attempt. What was surprising here was the fact that this attempt was actually successful. For once, that is, Gang Orca actually turned into a psychopathic monster. He would make disturbing jokes, talking about how to kill people in all sorts of ways. And Gang Orca would end up being released onto the streets. He would of course start to wreak havoc indiscriminately. He did not care who he was going to hurt. He had no moral system any longer. It had just been stripped from him, and now he was killing innocent lives. They would end up encountering Tenko Shimura, who had just killed his whole family. He would look at Tenko and not even consider who he was. All he saw was another brat, another target in his eyes, but Orca would not be allowed to actually even touch the little boy. Orca would have attempted to kill Tenko, but instead he would have been the one to die. A hole would have formed through Gang Orca's head, not even just a regular whale sort of blowhole either, but instead a hole shooting through his skull, his brain, making him look almost like a donut, a little tiny donut you could say. He would topple over. Tenko would be terrified seeing a bleeding out former hero, but All For One would just walk up to Tenko, introducing himself. He would pat the boy's head and comfort him. He would bring Tenko home with him, and Shigaraki would from that day forward be wrapped around All For One's finger. Over the years, Shigaraki would be closely monitored by All For One. Shigaraki would be given small doses of the toxin over the years in order to see how he would respond to it. He would have some interesting side effects. He would have gained quite a bit of strength, but he would have also formed pale white skin, whiter than paper, whiter than snow. He would have gained yellow teeth as well, and his personality would have shifted from that of a shy boy to that of a sadistic serial killer. He would have also grown quite a bit over the years, probably standing around 6 feet tall, lanky though. All For One would turn Shigaraki into a killing machine. Even his quirk has been amplified over the years as well. All For One would just monitor Shigaraki's development and appreciate all that was happening to him. Sure, he was still a bit of a skinny boy, but his quirk, it was even stronger than ever. His personality was almost completely gone by this point. He was a shell of his former self. He was no longer Tenko Shimura, but instead he was Shigaraki Tomura. He was known as one of the scariest villains ever. Rumors would have started to spread about there being some sort of sadistic serial killer out on the loose, out on the streets, killing all sorts of people, barely ever leaving a trace. But nobody would have really been able to find out who this guy was. It was all just rumors throughout the underworld. But Shigaraki would eventually make his presence known one day. By the time he was an adult, he would have completely formed a whole sociopathic personality. All For One would find that Shigaraki was ready to start taking charge, start actually going into the limelight, making his name known all throughout the world, having people have true fear, or know where to point all of their fear toward. Shigaraki would make his presence known at the USJ after getting the files from UA. He would have gotten the files from UA and studied the people's quirks. He would have been interested though in looking at some of these students. Some of these students were interesting, but overall, the one that he was really concerned about was All Might. He needed to crush the symbol of peace. At the USJ, he was hoping that the symbol of peace would have been there, but he wasn't. He had gathered a whole army of villains too, although they had basically ended up taking up his toxins. They would have ended up turning it into a more sort of lethal gas, you could say, over the years. He had dumped in the Joker gas. It was a variant of the original vials that Dr. Ujiko had. Dr. Ujiko would have heard from Shigaraki, why not try and turn the serum into that an invisible gas, an invisible odorless gas. I mean, it would make sense after all. You would be able to distribute it at an even faster rate. And that's exactly what ended up happening. While the ragtag team of just random thugs who were like supposedly villains, they were just here to get some sort of cash grab. They were here for money and to kill All Might. But they had never signed up for being Jokerized. They started laughing like maniacs. Their skin turned white as well. But they were still able to move. They were basically like nomus at this point, completely brainless zombies. They would have attacked the students. The students wouldn't have known what was coming to them. Kurogiri would have continued to teleport some of these students to other parts of the USJ, and the gas would have started to spread as well. Shigaraki would have actually started to become even more maniacal here. He would have ended up chopping off, what was his name, Aizawa's head. He would have gouged out his eyes as well, laughing the whole entire time. He would have found the greatest of glee in just doing this one single action. Aizawa had tried to erase Shigaraki's quirk, but it seemed that his strength was still there. He was shocked to find out just how strong this guy was. He seemed so weak. He would have never expected for him to have some sort of strength enhancing quirk. But it's not. It wasn't a strength enhancing quirk. This confused Aizawa. Where was his physical strength coming from? He was sure he had erased the man's quirk, but then all of a sudden, he was able to just grab his head, grab him, and then just crush his head like that. It made absolutely no sense to Aizawa, even when he thought that was the last thing on his mind. How was this possible? He was only wishing that All Might would arrive soon. He wished he could buy some more time for the students, but it seemed that this was where it would have ended for Aizawa. Shigaraki would have realized that All Might was apparently not coming, and he would have pouted. He would have turned to the students and started to, get a little bit more blood on his hands. Now that Aizawa was done with, he was able to freely use his quirk. He didn't even really have the Nomu here. He had the Nomu. It just wasn't here to do much of anything in comparison. It was just so that Shigaraki wouldn't have to really get his hands dirty if he didn't feel like doing it. If he was the one to actually take down All Might, he would have had it to where the Nomu would have beat down on All Might's face. If the Nomu wasn't able to successfully kill All Might, then he would come in at the last moment using this quake in order to have the decay spread all throughout All Might's body. If he had touched that man's chest, it would have been game over from there. There was no way that All Might could do anything in order to stop Shigaraki, because even if Shigaraki died, well, the quake still worked. You could not necessarily erase the effects of the quake. You would have to chop off an arm or a leg if you wanted to escape Shigaraki's quake. It had grown to that extent. It was moving at a rapid pace too. So overall, what ended up happening was that Shigaraki just ended up touching the ground, and that was it from right there and then. The USJ was absolutely no match for Shigaraki Tomura. Or was it Tomura Shigaraki, however you want to say it, because of the fact that his quake was able to spread, the decay spread all throughout the USJ. It went everywhere. No one was safe. The only ones who were unaffected were Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Kurogiri would have teleported Shigaraki away, actually, and nobody was able to do much or anything. The team trying to basically stop the villains, but she would have ended up getting caught in Shigaraki's decay. Just the tip of her boot ended up touching the decay, and it was a wrap for her from there. She would have ended up dying. The same would have happened for Tsuyu Manetta, because of the fact that it would have reached into the waters as well. Everybody ended up dying here. The whole USJ would have been enveloped in Shigaraki's decay. And Shigaraki would have just read the news reports talking about the tragedy that just happened at the USJ. He would have laughed in glee hearing about this. And he would have made a statement to say that he was the one to have done it. Heroes would have been trying to discover who this man was, who dare actually be able to kill all of the students, all of the first years of Class 1A. It infuriated the heroes to no end. It infuriated All Might the most because he should have been there, but it was because he was reckless with his own abilities. He was reckless with his time limit. That's why he ended up not being able to make it to USJ. He regretted it each and every time he looked at himself in the mirror. He realized that he had let his disciple down. He had let his successor down. He had basically lost One For All too. One For All was now gone. Who was going to stop All For One? Because he knew that this man was still alive. He had to have been alive. There was no way that this man wasn't alive. He had a feeling that way back then, he never fully defeated All For One. And what ended up happening at the USJ simply confirmed it. He doubted there were really that many villains with that sort of power. Sure, there may have been a couple, but this just had All For One written all over it. He would have set up a team in order to start tracking down signs of All For One or his minions or something. He would not sleep either. He would try in order to enact revenge for Izuku and for Nana Shimura, because of the fact that too many holders of One For All had died. All Might was the last one to hold One For All, and now because Izuku was dead, there would be no more successors. There would be nobody to pass on the quake, and All Might was running on a ticking how do you even say it? All Might was running on a clock, you could say. It was a ticking bomb, you could say. A ticking time bomb. Eventually, One For All would just disappear. He was running on the embers of One For All, and he knew that the time limit was just getting shorter and shorter. Eventually, he would never be able to use One For All again, and there would be no one else to ever truly stop the villainy. That's why he had ended up pressing Class 1B even harder as well. When it came on to the sports festival that would have been cancelled, UA would have been under quite a bit of bad rep. It would not have necessarily been closed, but it would have been under extreme watch by the authorities. They were scared. UA ended up becoming a dorm system earlier on, but that did not help to quiet the worries of others. They were scared that their children would just continue to be targets. Many were trying to take their kids out of UA as well. UA would have been in shambles. The villainy would have started to rise more and more, considering All Might was becoming less and less active. In exchange, there would have been more heroes on the streets as well, in order to make sure they could combat their villainy. But with this new Joker, Venom, not Venom, but this Joker gas spreading all around, causing these guys to have amplified strength, causing them to lose their sanity, just start laughing the whole time and just doing all sorts of crimes. With no sort of organization, it was hard for the heroes to manage, but Shigaraki did not care. He was laughing the whole time. He would continue to just kill heroes he would continue to kill heroes, kill villains. He did not care. It was indiscriminate at this point. He had lost all sorts of sanity, but he would have made sure that all of this was going according to plan. He was a pretty smart individual. Still, he was a Shigaraki who laughs. Not the Batman who laughs, but Shigaraki. This was who he was. He would continue to kill. And when it came on to All For One would eventually try to stop Shigaraki. He would have realized that Shigaraki was going a bit too far now. He was getting a bit too reckless in his plans. If he continued to stomp, there would be no Japan to rule over. Shigaraki didn't care though. All For One cared. He would try to stop Shigaraki, but Shigaraki would just use his quirk in order to try and kill All For One. He had no emotional attachments any longer. All For One would try and take over Shigaraki's body, but Shigaraki would fight back. All For One had realized he had created a monster that not even he could defeat any longer. This Joker gas was only the start of everybody's troubles at this point. Shigaraki would go unmatched. Shigaraki would continue to tear down Japan. He would make sure that it would be rebuilt in his image, and by the end, it was pure anarchy. Many villains would be on the streets laughing, suffocating to death, but they would have had amplified strength and speed for a short amount of time. They would have overran Japan. The nations would have started to get together because of the fact that Shigaraki was becoming too much of a nuisance. He had literally taken over Japan at this point. He was just too evil, too much to just let him go by. They could not just turn a blind eye to Japan any longer. It was literally overrun by villains. What could they do at this point? They would have sent out the one known as Star and Stripes in order to kill Shigaraki, but she wouldn't be aware of how his quirk worked, or the fact that he didn't even know who he was any longer. He was just moving as himself, you could say. He was just moving on complete instinct. Everything was just turned to shambles. All for One was pretty much the brains behind the operations, but Shigaraki was smart enough to actually outsmart. Basically, it went like this. Shigaraki was intelligent. He was smart. He was able to overpower All for One. He was aware of the fact that All for One was running on fumes while he wasn't even at his prime yet. He was continuously getting stronger. His quirk was getting stronger by the day. His physical strength was getting even more overwhelming. His sanity was just going through the window. He had completely abandoned humanity at this point. All he cared about was strength and power. That's how this world was run by, right? So why should he care about people's feelings? This world was what created what was known as the Shigaraki who laughs, the Batman who laughs, whatever you want to dub him by. He didn't really care. He knew that this world needed to be put down. So that's why he became the menace that he was, the menace to society. He would have ended up killing the one known as Starring Strengths, because she wouldn't be able to get enough of a read for Shigaraki. That and the fact that, well, she wasn't able to touch him. He would have had too many of his minions grab at her. Too many of his minions would have attacked her, although many would have been put down. There were still some that overwhelmed her. The number one hero of the USA. She would have been crying. This was the first time she had ever really gone through such, what do you even call it, challenges? This wasn't a challenge anymore. This was life or death. Shigaraki grabbed her face and she screamed in absolute horror and pain as she died right there and then. The USA had just lost their number one hero, and then we have Shigaraki, who will continue to terrorize the nations, who will continue to go and destroy several societies. Japan was just one. The USA was another. Anybody who dared to attack Shigaraki would learn the consequences. Many people would try and go into hiding as well, but it was fruitless in the end. By the end, it was now a world run by Shigaraki Tomura, the Batman who laughs. And he would be on his throne with two minions, Robins you could say. He would have held them by chains. And these would have been the heroes of India, and, well, I shouldn't just say that. Basically representatives of the governments of each society. They would have been put down, and the ones held by chains. These were what they ended up becoming at the end. They had prided themselves on their standings in society, but now they had been diminished to this. Dogs, you could say. And Shigaraki loved it. This was how it would end. And this is the end of the what if. Just world domination, anarchy, terror. And that's how Shigaraki loved it. Because in this world, everybody had to work together technically, because of the fact that, well, they all had one person to fear, and that was Shigaraki Tomura. He just saw this as a beautiful world. This was a wonderful day for Shigaraki, when he could just sit on his throne, hear the terrorists of everybody in this world screaming for help, but there would be no hero to help them. They would now know his pain. And that is how we end the What If.